Okay, so I have a series of questions that I received. I think I gathered them all in one document. Some of them are in Portuguese, so I'll translate on the fly. Oh, sorry. I'll translate on the fly. And I believe some have already been answered, so I'll do my best here to do a little combination of the questions.
It's better to ask again the question. Than to.
Yeah, but some different areas and some of them can be repeated.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start, well, since there is no particular way of starting, I'll start just by listing the questions one by one. So the first question there was is that the idea of planet evaporation from clusters seemed to be incorrect. Would this imply that planet capture is also very unlikely since there are no wandering planets?
No wandering planets. There are wandering planets.
Yeah, I think it's the opposite of
I mean,
Yeah, I think well, I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but let me try to address that. What the simulations I talked about showed is that the release of planets, or the liberation of planets from solar systems by passing stars, is a moderate event. As in, there are some, but not a huge number of planets that are freely floating through that mechanism. So in an average cluster of 1,000 stars, there will be a handful of freely floating planets liberated by passing stars. However, there's another source of freely floating planets that I didn't have time to talk about. If a solar system forms, let's say, 10 planets in a narrow annulus, the planets will scatter off of each other, and the lighter ones will be kicked out into the into the cluster. So there's a second source of freely floating planets that I didn't talk about. And we actually have the opposite problem in terms of observations, as James was alluding to, namely that when we do microlensing experiments, we find only a handful of planets, but if you extrapolate the limited data, we find more freely floating planets than we think there should be. So observationally, it's a problem in the other direction. Did you want to add?
No, that was it. I was going to add the microlensing result there, yeah.
So sorry, I stole Jim's line.
That's okay.
So whoever asked that, if you would like to ask a follow-up, you're certainly welcome, because I might have misunderstood what was being asked. Like I was trying to get you guys to be earlier. Don't be shy. This is for you. So please ask if you have. Just raise your hand, and we'll get you a microphone, or you can shout. So, yes, Barbara.
So within the planets getting flung off, are there any simulations or I guess observations probably not, but simulations of how often a flung off planet gets captured by another star? And could that, I'm going to go conspiracy theory now, be the origin of planet X that gets talked about within the solar system?
Oh, well, yes, there are simulations of that. And I can give you a semi-precise answer. The cross-section for planet capture is typically 10 times smaller than the cross-section for planet ejection. So all things being equal,
They don't get captured very often.
well, yeah, but they are captured. They're just captured 10 times less than they're liberated.
Right.
And if you ask the question, Planet 9, is Planet 9 a planet that was captured from a freely floating state in our birth cluster? The answer is that we know the cross-section, which means we know how big of area the solar system presents for, how big a target it presents for eating a loose Planet 9. And that data, coupled with how long we lived in the birth cluster and the density of stars, etc., suggests that it is a 1% chance, or a 2% chance, or a 3% chance of gaining Planet 9 through that channel. So that could be the reason. 3% chances happen 3% of the time, it turns out. And 3% effects are just not that rare. It's not guaranteed, certainly, but you're going to probably meet at least 30 people before you marry one. But yet you get married, or most people do, for better or worse. But but low probability events happen all the time, right? So if we, as a solar system, have a property that's a 1% effect, it might be just the way we are, right? I think that was all I had to say.
Okay.
Microphone.
Yes. With respect to the Kepler mission, what is the size, quantity of information that is sent every 3 months? And how much time does it take to process or analyze this information?
So the size and quantity, that would maybe need someone on the Kepler mission to answer that. So if we look at the numbers, we have about 190,000 stars, and this is kind of continuous data that's taken in short and long cadences, but we're on the time scale of seconds we're talking about. So this is a lot of data to download and process. And so analysing that data is it's a long process in itself, but when I say a long process, we've just seen some results where the data has been continually analysed in quarters, so these 3-month quarters that come, but then it's also reprocessed in bulk. And this is where we've seen those results that were published this year from Morton et al., where we added essentially another 2,000 planetary candidates. I always want to say we're talking clearly about candidates again here, because we don't follow these up, or we try to. They're difficult to follow up. They're validated statistically in applying statistical models. So that's something that we need to always remember. But when we're talking about the high cadence data, these streams, especially when we're looking for exo-Earths, remember, if we want a statistical analysis, a result, a statistical detection, that's 3 transits minimum over a period of 3 years. We need to observe stars for 3 years. If we wanted an exo-Earth in the habitable zone of a sun-like star, we need 3 transits. 2 we can do, but 3 pins down in orbit properly. And we need that needs to be validated. So that's 3 years of data, high cadence data, where we're looking at data that's taken over integration times of seconds over 3 years, and there's only a few days of non-observations that happen. So when that data is passed down from the spacecraft, it's only a loss of a few days every 3 months. So it's a mountain of data, but remember, Kepler only sends down the data that it requires. It doesn't send down images. So although I'm saying it's a mountain of data, it's only the photometry that's sent. So it's not the image. We can't go back into the archive and look at the images and reprocess. We can reprocess with the photometry. Am I answering the question at some level? Okay, but there was 2 or 3 questions in there, was there? Or?
There were specific numbers that probably need somebody from the
That would need, exactly, yeah.
That may be in Eduardo's talk, no? He did give a bit of
Mm-hmm.
So I think.
So yeah, go on and
Take a look,
Yeah.
yes.
take a look in the talk, yeah.
And it's worth saying also that for the Kepler mission, there's citizen science as well. So people that are interested in looking at these transits or even finding new transits, this data is online for people that don't work on this to go there and look. And there has been a few planet candidates that were missed by all of that pipeline that Eduardo kind of told us quickly yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago, I don't know. You can go and do it yourself. You can try to find the ones that were already found and even potentially help to find planet candidates that were not found yet. So,
Yeah, and
so there's interactivity there.
And that's right, and there's a program set up to do that, the Citizen Science program that's been running. So they have a database, a website. You can go, you can take the data, you can analyse the data. It's nice GUI sets. You can run periodogram analyses. It's all set up. The data's waiting, and there's been some very interesting results came out of that. The teams will follow up with the radio velocities to do confirmation, but all the data's there to analyse. So if you go to Google Citizen Science Kepler, you'll find that website.
And you will be a co-author of the paper
Yeah.
if you are the person that finds a planet candidate that has not been found yet. So it could be a way to have another paper.
Okay, so that's a long question. Is there any known effort to do some computer simulations for life development, I guess it's life development, under conditions different than those on Earth? I mean, is it possible to try and simulate what would happen if the solar system rock contamination that Fred mentioned would end up in other planets that could develop from there? It it interests me their opinion on whether we can start making educated guesses of what should be, I guess, the process of looking for which different environments.
You guys wanna get that, or this is me?
Why don't you start?
Okay, I'll start. There are many models, computer models of evolution available. But usually, most of them deal with the dynamics of evolution in populations that behave like populations on Earth, with molecules that behave like molecules on Earth, life as we know it. The problem with making simulations for conditions very different from Earth is that it is a branching scheme of possibilities. What kind of chemicals you have. And then you begin to get into molecules whose properties are not very known in certain media. I mean, you can think of water, but you can think of liquid methane, you can think of lots of other things. So the range of possibilities increases so much that these simulations begin to get very little connection with reality. They begin to be more like a game in terms of what's possible, what's not possible. If that's what the question was intended. I'm interpreting the question like really detailed simulations, not just random simulations in terms of conditions similar to Earth. So I don't think there is anything that actually enlightens us in terms of the details of possible life, different from us outside.
Also, you have to think of what kind of simulation you want. To simulate an organism, simulate the epidemiology of the organism, what kind of aspect of life you want to simulate. And in all those cases, you need a lot of variables which you don't know, unless you give me a scenario. I was joking with with Fred and James Sunday about the possibility that Mars have been contaminated because we're sending probes there. So that's something that we can try, because we more or less know what happens there. Even still, it will be very hard, because let's say there is contamination in Mars. We don't know exactly what, if there is something, we have to simulate a model for each possible contaminant. So without finding anything, it's kind of pointless to do it right now. We don't have enough information to start doing that. And remember, we have to check out what kind of simulation we want, because that's too generic right now.
I just wanted to add one thing. It's kind of surprising, but I want to emphasize this to you youngins, that we don't have the fundamental equations that describe the origin of life or even the workings of life. So if you want to write down the equations of motion for an ant, we don't know how to do that. So we can't make an honest computer simulation and calculation of how an ant works. On the other hand, we can make an honest calculation of how a star works. It's hard, but it's not that hard. And tomorrow I will show you how to do it with different laws of physics. It's easy enough that we can do it. I would love to be able to write down the equations of motion for an ant and calculate him away, or equations of motion that describe
Which
how.
ants of the 20,000?
Yeah, well, I have to pick my favorite ant.
Okay.
His name would be Fred. Or I'd even love more to be able to have the equations that describe how chemicals that we heard about yesterday and this morning somehow end up being what we call life. But we don't have those equations. Now, it's not clear we could solve them if we had them. We don't even have them to solve. So we're a lot farther away from doing the computer simulation that question asked about than many people think. Whereas for like stars and cell evolution, we can just do it, right? It's kind of a weird thing that ants are so much more complex than stars. You think ants you walk by and you don't really think twice about. And you think of stars as these mysterious things far away, but they're far simpler.
So next one is about sex. So one is, the question is, what's the difference between genetic drift and genetic flow? So I will back in the second question as well. It's been said that the reason for sex is increasing variability. So why not 3, 4, or many different sexes?
Okay, I think the second one is easier. I think Mario told you so the answer today, earlier in his talk.
I can repeat it.
You can repeat it. I tell them about the same thing, but I don't call it sex, I call it mating types. But it's the same thing, that you have some rotifers, I mean some...
But they don't have the catchword, sex.
Yes, you're right. I mean, in the propaganda side of the business, you're much better than me. No, yes. But,
Other things as well.
well, yeah, perhaps. Well, anyway, what are called mating types is that some organisms have several ways to do that. Like, you want to re-answer what I said? Because
No, go ahead.
yeah, okay. So they may have dozens of different types, and what happens is that they can, I would say mate, but it's not mate, they can exchange genetic material with any other type that's not their own. So if you have two sexes, if you're male, I'm a male, I have to find a female, there's no other option. But those guys, they have, let's say, a couple dozens mating types, so it means that they have only one chance in 24 to find exactly the same type that he is, or she is, or whatever it is. So it becomes easier to find, to reproduce with those other types. So yes, we have several, let's say, kind of sex in some organisms. So we do have that.
Sorry, it's not my question, but maybe a parenthesis.
Sure.
Maybe what the person was trying to understand is whether there needs to be the mixing of genetic material between two types at any given time. Could you have a mix of 3 different types instead of a male and a female, X, Y, and Z, mixing all those 3 together to create one?
Oh, okay. It
it's
went along those lines.
I
Okay.
think that's
Okay.
what was.
Yeah, I don't know of any living organisms that actually needs 3 types to reproduce. That would decrease the chances of actually mating dramatically, because 2 is already 1 in 50%, so 1 in 2. If you have 100, as I mentioned earlier, some ciliates have that, then the odds are very much better. You meet someone with whom you can exchange genetic material and produce something useful. One thing I need to add is that this kind of reproduction in protozoans is not related to, the sex they do is not related directly to reproduction. They do sex, and then they go away, and one day they split. And when they split, they increase the genetic variability. So sex is distant from reproduction in these animals, but it's still sex and reproduction. Increases variability. But with more than 2, I don't know any. Do you know any?
No.
No, I don't think it exists.
I think there is a problem in the way the DNA is done. I mean, because we can have a par, but
I don't think it's possible to have a trios.
No, yeah, certainly not like that. But
that's a problem.
For example,
It's a
your
chemical problem, it's a
parthenogenetic thing, it's a mechanical problem.
Yes.
But your parthenogenetic lizard, for example, is a hybrid species that when back-crossed with each of the species and produce triploids.
Oh, that's the Mexican one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I read that one.
So,
That's pretty crazy.
yeah, they can do things that don't. Molecules find a way of twisting themselves and eventually doing it, like in 2 steps or something like that.
Yeah, but
it might be
It's
possible.
important to know that some molecules are impossible.
Yeah.
Molecules has a
we
very
see-
strict
if-
morphology in
If
3
we see the
methods.
segregation mechanisms as we see
Yeah.
them in most organisms,
Yes.
but it's possible to imagine scenarios. I mean, microorganisms do things that, yeah, they are
Yes.
sex, but they're not sex like we used to, like
Yeah.
to see in higher eukaryotes, in metazoans. They chop off parts of their genetic material and then take in other parts of genetic materials of other individuals and then patch all together. So in this sense, yes, we may imagine that some organisms do something like more than 2 organisms involved in sex in the sense of genetic exchange.
Also-
It's not just 3 things that get together to make sex. It's not like that.
Yeah, and also you have to notice that some microorganisms, they just take DNA that they find available there and incorporate their own. That's
Yeah, the rotifers, yeah. we saw earlier.
Virus do
Yes.
this all the time, and
Virus.
that's exactly how we do. If you want to change their DNA, exactly what we do is like that. We find out we find where the genes attach to the other, and we attach our own gene that we produce it to put there. So that's how we do it, and they do it naturally, but they just by chance.
yeah, let's give you a chance to ask.
I don't understand something that when I don't know if it's relating with the you are discussing, but when you talk about Luca, what do you mean about Luca?
Oh, okay. LUCA is an abbreviation for last universal common ancestor, which is the representative of the last species before we had the 3 domains of life splitting, or 2 because one of them is hybrid. So that would be the thing that is neither, but is the ancestor of both. How
Okay.
would it look like? It's something like that. That's how it goes. So
Okay.
people are trying to make this kind of chimera. Who is that? How was this creature? Because it was very much closer to the origin of life than anything we know.
But the life, the origin of life was about about in the transformers molecule. Okay, but what I don't know how.
Can I just, yeah, one thing that many people have trouble with is when you're talking about evolution of traits in a phylogeny, is that you have this, okay, A, B, C. And you have things that happen in this ancestor here, okay, before it splits in B and C, for example. Things happen here, things change, because this was a species and it was evolving as a species. The thing is, these things telescope into a single branch, but in fact, you may have several branches here that you don't know about. So when you talk about this Luca, we are talking about archaea and bacteria. Okay, eukaryotes came later like this, or this seems like it was like this. Luca was anywhere between here and the origin of life, which I'm calling this root here. So you don't know exactly what Luca. It could be here, one day before it began to split, or it could be here, one day after the origin of life. There's no way of knowing. So what you're trying to build is something that fit that branch. You don't know exactly where, but you're sure it was not after this. So that's what they're trying to infer, how it, not look at like, well, how it functioned. So I don't know if I helped to a little bit. Well, that
Yes,
much.
the first part. Just to answer the first part, they asked about genetic drift, what, that flow? Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. If you recall, again, your high school, Mendelian genetics, you know about this, they have the heterozygote, the homozygote, dominant, recessive, you remember all these kind of things? Now imagine if the population is infinite. Those things will distribute in such a way, in a binomial distribution, okay? If you know enough math, you should understand that. If, and only if, the population is infinite, but the population is not infinite, the population is finite, it's much smaller. And you have any sorts of disturbance, because a stochastic process, some individuals die, and so it's possible that the frequency of these genes is not exactly what we expect in a theoretical distribution. Actually, they're not. And because of those stochastic processes, they will go up and down stochastically. That's what we call genetic drift. It's a property of the population. Okay? With time, they will, and sometimes they can fix in the population. So what happens is that, you have this gene, and you have a certain proportion of how these genes are in the population. And by any other reason but stochastic, I mean no selection at all, they may go up or down, and this is what's called genetic drift. Okay? Genetic flow is different. Genetic flow, so you have to imagine that the population you're interested in is spread along a large area. If you spread a large area, you can imagine that there are pockets with different genetic frequencies along the area. You see, there is some heterogeneity in the genetic populations. All right, and the flow, it means because those organisms, they reproduce and they kind of migrate. You have that the genes can flow from one pocket to another pocket. I give an example that's pretty common. That's an Iceland example. You have an island is isolated. Usually, what happens after a long time, if the island is pretty far from the continent, is that you have different species after a while. However, if it's not that far from the continent, it cannot be too close also. What happens is that from time to time, a few individuals come from the continent to the island, or vice versa. So they have a genetic flow from the continent to the island. So they change the frequencies of the genes in the island because they bring some material there from the continent. That's what we call genetic flow. That's clear now? Okay.
Are you talking? You are talking about different ways to have organisms have a DNA. I was wondering, like for example, the horizontal inheritance. So what do you think about this inheritance? This change the way, like we see a tree of life to a web of life, like for example.
They do exist. They got a Nobel for that, didn't they? That woman?
Yeah,
she got she got a Nobel for that.
That was 30 years ago.
Yeah, pretty good, awesome. Anyway, it does happen. It happens a lot with vegetables. It happens anywhere. But when we talk about phylogenetic reconstruction, usually this is the kind of thing that inputs an error in our noise, in our analysis. So we have to work with it.
Yeah. Usually when you have this kind of thing, it means you're treating you with two different entities. Like people say, oh, eukaryotes are related to archaea or to bacteria. The analyses are kind of ambiguous. Sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's another. Of course, you're not dealing with the same thing. They're hybrids. Part of it is maybe more related to archaea, part of it may be more related to bacteria. It's perfectly, this is the reality, because that is not a unified entity. So if you make, like when you make phylogeny is based on mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondria are bacteria. We even know what are the closest free living bacteria. They have their own DNA. You can make phylogenies based on that. But you're making phylogeny of mitochondria. You're making phylogenies, reconstructing phylogenetic relationships among bacteria, not their bearers, not their hosts. And they go together often, like parasites go together with their hosts, but not necessarily they are identical. There may be deviations along the way. So when you're dealing with entities which are not a whole, which are not one thing, that are historical composites, you can have histories which are incongruent. That's normal. You find that all the time. When you get to the level of metazoans, that doesn't happen much anymore, because horizontal transmission is minimal. But when you're at the base of the tree of life, it happens a lot. That's why some people show that representation all messed up at the base.
It is messed up.
Has a recently article published of the genome of tardigrade that these species has a lot of exon genes.
Yeah, there's like rotifers, yeah. And surprisingly, not surprisingly, I mean, they are also just like rotifers, things that are very resistant to desiccation. And as a consequence, highly resistant to open space conditions. They are metazoans, and tardigrades can survive exposure to ionizing radiations in vacuum, in orbit for like 2 weeks and still be alive. Which is incredible. And people examine that DNA is all chopped up. But when you put it in water again, it magically rebuilds itself in the right sequence. And the thing comes back to life. It's incredible.
There's a perfect extraterrestrial.
Perfect, yeah.
Maybe
And Hoyle didn't even know about that to this extent when he made his crazy theory.
Can I add something in this line? There's a bacteria that, as far as I know, it was first detected after the Chernobyl.
Oh yeah, that's incredible.
It's called Deinococcus radiodurans.
Yes.
Which has probably 4 genoma, and the RNA recombinase works real time. When the neutron breaks the genoma, it recombines. Is that the correct description?
That's more or less the correct description, but there is a fungus which is a lot more impressive because it.
That goes the same way that it would be an ET perfect that goes to the radiation in the space and would survive for some time.
Yeah. Nowadays, the core of the radiator in Chernobyl is covered with this black goo. That's a fungus that's taking energy from radiation. It's basically covering the whole thing and taking energy from
It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, yeah.
That is a science fiction.
It is a science fiction story. And the worst, nobody knows if this fungus was.
I think it was a Spider-Man, that black thing that
species
goes
we
to
know.
Spider-Man.
Is a species we know, or if it is a new species that nobody knew about and
They
just
came
colonized it there. Nobody knows where it came from, because fungi taxonomy is very, very complicated.
Hardly anyone still.
Yeah, very few people
They
study
gave up
that.
because
Yeah.
after they see the extension of the problem.
But it's extraordinary, this thing. And they're not, it's not, people tend to imagine, oh, little bacteria in a core. No, the thing is covering like a
Survives
mess.
inside
Yes.
the reactor.
Yes, over is covering, like the bubble.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd
Would
like
it
to
be
see-
possible to find out when did that split? How far back?
Oh no, this is the general phylogenetic position of the thing is known. It is one of the old Myxomycetes So it's a gelatin, how do you call it in English? Slime mold. It's a slime mold.
Slime mold.
Slime mold.
Yeah, they're closely related to politicians.
Especially Republicans.
Ronaldo, when did the organism start to make sex?
When?
When? Yeah, the first one.
Oh, as far as I understand, about 2.7 billion years ago, the first eukaryotes already have sex.
That's
Okay,
a
so-
age, though.
Yes, that's a minimum age.
Okay, so before that, the diversity was caused just by mutation or?
Before sex?
Yeah, before sex.
Well, the other mechanisms still work. I mean, genetic drift is still working, mutation works. Mutations is overrated by people. Biologists also overrated mutation for a long time. Most mutations do nothing, they're neutral. There's a lot of DNA, and most of DNA you have, you don't use it. So just by statistics, most mutations are in DNA that's not actually active in yourself. So most mutations are neutral by themselves. But mutation is a powerful mechanism too, because we're talking about geological timeline. So even things that are very weak, after a billion years, it's a lot. But yes, genetic drift works, mutation works, even before the first sexual organisms already have, evolution was already working. And natural selection. Natural selection was working. I mean, if mutation, genetic drift increase or change the frequencies of the genotype, you have natural selection that will restrict this by selecting the most advanced, the most fit organism.
Just a little follow-up. We have also to consider that some of the advantages we see in certain biological mechanisms, they only make sense today. When life was at the beginning, there's no competition, there's no parasitism, there's nothing of that. So things are a lot simpler. So these mechanisms appeared as they became necessary. They evolved as they became necessary.
I'm not certain about that.
There was no parasitism, I agree. No competition. The minutes you have two organisms, you have competition.
Yeah. But not in the sense that it is today.
Oh, okay.
They have to worry about things that are a billion times smaller than
No,
they
that's
were.
okay. That's okay.
It's off.
It's off. It's off.
It's up.
So Mario showed us this morning a lot of strange creatures that seem to be much more specialized. But
There weren't
how?
many invitees.
Sorry.
Nothing.
But what
We are strange
happened
creatures,
to this line of evolution that ended in us today? What was special in the first, in the Luca, in the, I don't know which specimen was that
No, that is not a specimen.
drove us to us today?
People are trying to infer how it would be. That's all. There is no lookup, really.
Oh, okay,
That's
but
just a cute
whatever.
name.
But you showed us a lot of some species that seem to be much more special, much more.
Yeah, my intention with that is just to show that life is not
right
always.
way, the right choices, and so.
No, they did the right choices too.
Uh-huh.
There are no wrong choices when it comes to survival. The wrong choices are extinct. The things that are alive today, they're all right choices, no matter how weird. You see these parasites, and when they begin their parasite life, they're perfectly normal creatures. And as time goes by, they get weirder and weirder, and they lose eyes, they lose mouths, they lose everything. They're right. They're going the right path. It's the path that's working for them at that moment. So there are no mistakes there. It's just that when you go to extreme environments, you expect to find extreme adaptations.
But we are debating here; they are not. So.
But they don't need to.
Science, something like that.
No, but what's the question?
Because we're not that special, I guess,
Yeah,
evolutionary
I
wise.
think it's exactly opposite.
Debating
We're not
doesn't
really
matter.
special.
They don't need to debate. Like those parasites don't need to debate.
Nobody needs.
anything.
We're the only species that actually worried about other species. That's our only endearing quality, in my view. All the others are not very good, but this one I find interesting.
Well,
We're the only
well-
creatures that actually worry about.
Mhm.
No, there are congresses about beetles. Wow.
Yeah. I say that Beatles don't do Congress about
They
themselves.
don't do promises about humans.
The thing is, okay, that's, I'm not sure that's totally accurate. Ants care about fungus, other species, you know.
Dogs care about.
Yes, they depend on each other to survive. So
But they like the bait.
They don't-
Mating is the special thing. The mating is what makes it special.
I would not.
Maybe associations, yeah.
Maybe they
I
do
am super
debate.
special.
And certainly species.
Not in English.
Oh yeah, interactions, ecological interactions are everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think she was calling up the staff to say something about culture. We're the only ones that have elaborate culture that accumulates.
Chimps also
Oh,
have.
as far as we can translate,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure if we had all these extinct hominids around today, we would have all the gradations there, no doubt. It's just that we killed all of them.
Okay.
I would ask the permission to shift to the very other side of the discussion. That would be extending the concept of habitable zone. I've heard that many times, galactic habitable zone in terms of survivalness, in terms of chemical enrichment, in terms of catastrophes around, the lifetime of galaxies. How would you see that? Is that a concept, a good one to include and to extend the planetary habitable zone, or is just something fancy to put the chemical, cosmic chemistry in perspective?
That's a very good question, and you've asked about 4 or 5 questions there. So, no, a good question. So, the first thing I would recommend to all of you, especially the students who are here, be careful. So when people say the habitable zone, make sure you know what they're talking about. So let me just go through some of the examples quickly. The standard use of the habitable zone is to put a planet the right distance from its star so that water would be liquid on its surface.
If it was Earth-like.
If it was Earth-like.
Yeah.
And then, as James is going to give you a million caveats, and correctly so, by the way, that it depends on the atmosphere and it depends on a lot of other details as to exactly whether or not it will be the right temperature at the surface. Okay, so the standard habitable zone is that zone of distances from the star where you can have liquid water. And then, as James talked about in his talk this morning, there's variations on how wide that zone is even for a given particular star. Now that's the usual habitable zone. The galactic habitable zone is just something that has the same name, and I'm going to use that term tomorrow in yet a different context. And that is not as robust, okay? The idea there is that if you're in the galaxy, the middle of the galaxy is denser, and the outer part of the galaxy is less dense. The middle part of the galaxy has higher metallicity, the outer part of the galaxy has lower metallicity. Since there seems to be a trend with metallicity as to what kinds of planets we get. And that signal is very complicated because James spent like 3 hours on this.
Sorry.
Yeah, so remember those 3 hours, okay. And it's not simply that you get so far out and the metallicity is so low you can never have a planet, although they speak as if that's the case. So there are papers that say, well, you have to be close to where the sun is in the Milky Way to be habitable. I think that we should extend that almost throughout our galaxy. As in, we don't really have much restriction from metallicity or stellar density within our galaxy. The restrictions are minimal. That's my own opinion, but there are papers that you can read that will say that they're more restrictive than that. And then people have taken the concept of habitable zone in many other contexts. So my advice is just to be careful and see what people are talking about before you make any conclusion. Did you want to add something?
Well, I guess you went through that well. But yeah, the galactic habitable zone, it's not something I've spent much attention on as an observer. So things like how much we've studied the formation environment, being in clusters that Fred talked about, but more so when you've got young stars, massive stars that quickly evolve, and then we have supernova. What's the sterilization radius, if we like, of that region? So not disrupting the planetary system at all, but actually sterilizing the system. That depends on where you are in the cluster environment and stuff, and it depends on the stellar density, which is a function of distance from the galactic center at some level, and then there's local clumps and things like that. The other thing is, I like to come back to the normal habitable zone, the classical habitable zone around stars, in the sense that, so I only talked about mainly the classical habitable zone. We keep it as simple as possible. I think I mentioned maybe in the first class that, of course, we can think of the habitable zone as being rings as well. If we're talking about things like Europa, potentially it's habitable under this massive ice sheet. Europa doesn't really have an atmosphere. So the question is, I made the point of, for instance, if these planets that we find, like Proxima b and stuff, to even be in the classical habitable zone, they need to have an atmosphere. That's what I said. But yet Europa doesn't have an atmosphere, and potentially it's chock full of life under there. So that's another interesting concept that we need to think about. And where that boundary of the habitable zone lies, it's hard to even get into that, in the sense that I showed that if you change just the mass of the planet, you go from 1 to 5 Earth masses, then you significantly alter the boundary of the classical habitable zone. And of course, again, we're using models that don't have things like clouds. We're still trying to model heat redistribution around these planets and things like that. So, and then you throw in tidal locking, and it really becomes just an absolute mess. So, yeah, we're still very simplistic in all of these definitions of what the habitable zone is. But one we know is in the solar system. So if we take Earth and we dump it around any star we want, where would it maintain its liquid oceans? And that's liquid water on the surface. And that's the basic definition that at least I work off. Keep it very simplistic.
May I add something?
Yep.
In the same way, you took point that Europa is out of the habitable zone, although they have liquid water that's considered the parameter which we look for the habitable zone. We now know more about organisms, and perhaps they can have a broader range that we thought for. If you said 5 years ago that you have a fungi that lives by living from radiation for a nuclear reactor, I say, here, that's bullshit. And now we know, well, perhaps that's true. So.
At the end, anything could be habitable depending on
In fact, we wrote a paper back in 2000 that pointed out that if you, well, I said in the talk yesterday that if you eject Earth from the solar system, the radioactive material inside will keep liquid water pockets 14 kilometers down. But if you have a bigger planet and a thicker ice sheet, then you could put that planet anywhere, and the internal radioactivity will keep a liquid ocean beneath an ice sheet. Europa is in a very special place where tidal squeezing, due to its orbital position, gives you the heat. But if you have a big enough body, the internal heat will be enough to do that. And that means that if you're willing to have a liquid ocean under an ice sheet and a reduced but non-zero energy source, your habitable planet can be anywhere. And then the entire galaxy is then habitable in that sense. But what people mean by the galactic habitable zone is the classical one that James was talking about. But as Ronaldo pointed out, you could be anywhere in principle. So.
I would hook that, because I was always questioned the galactic habitable zone context. It didn't make a big sense to me. That's why I was asking you.
Yeah.
It didn't make a big sense to me, because you would completely rule out elliptical galaxies in the context.
Yeah, I think it's very overly restrictive. So yeah, let's let him have his question. So. But your point is well taken. So.
Following up with that, we have acknowledged of the traces of water on the planets on stars habitable zones.
Do we have traces of water around stars in the
on the habitable zones of the stars? Do we really have traces of water on that planets?
So do you mean traces of water in disks or something around stars? Because we can't really observe anything. So yeah, or systems that we know of, planetary systems, for instance, we only have, for instance, a handful that we can really study in detail down to the regions of the habitable zone. So the classical regions of the habitable zone, in the sense that the stars are so far away that even when we use these adaptive optics, these beautiful methods I talked about, we're not really sampling the habitable zones. Now, the nearest stars, we can do that. We can sample their habitable zones, particularly if they're sun-like stars. They're 1 AU, if we use that classical term. But these things that we study in general tend to be old. And what we do see, if we look at anything, are debris disks. And they seem to be much further away. So we have things like debris disks around, and probably you can speak a bit more about this because I'm maybe going off track here, but yeah, knowing about water around other stars, certainly near habitable zones and things, is not something that I've spent much time on.
Well, there's one positive thing we can tell you, though. In the circumstellar disks that form alongside every star, we can measure both evidence for water vapor and also water ices condensed on grains. So there's lots of evidence that the disks have the basic raw material of water to later on do what water needs to do to be habitable. The details are what James said. We can't actually see anything directly, but we can take inventory. And the universe has enough water, molecular clouds have enough water, even the disks that we know the planets are being made of have enough water. So we've got plenty of water. Getting it in the right place, we're working on it. But we know there's water there.
And also, we do know for disks precisely, so if we're talking about planet formation inside protoplanetary disks, we can find out about what is called a snow line. So it's the moment where in the radius, or the moment in the disk where we can see the difference between water being vapor and water being ice, which is used to, so we don't know, as Fred is saying, we don't know much about, we cannot observe much about, but people do model some of those things of if you have dust particles there, have an ice mantle around, and how the evolution is going to go. In terms of modeling for grain growth, for instance, having an ice layer around these dust grains is something that is shown in laboratory to make it easier for these grains to stick together and grow. So just having the fact that we do observe that there is water ice around some of those grains, and that this is something that could play an important role for grain growth, which is the first step for potentially for planet formation, starts to give some clues about how could we get so much water. There is a lot of water that could be potentially used for all sorts of life that we do know. We just don't know yet exactly how you go from that into this, I guess, into oceans.
And that's an important point, in that the first observation, right, direct observation of that snow line was made just 2 months ago, published 2 months ago.
It has been theorized for quite a while, modeled.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just coming back to that point, was that the very first observation, direct observation, was made of that snow line where that transition occurs. But it was only made because that snow line seemed to happen much further than we would expect for the type of star it was, and it's believed that the star was undergoing outburst. And so basically you evaporate all this stuff all the way out, maybe periodically these stars outburst, and you're evaporating all that material until, I think, what was it again, this classical 70 AU or something like that, where that transition happened. So it's the first time that area, that ice line was observed observationally. It was just 2 months ago, so it's, this is the observations that are ongoing.
Okay, let's go to attacking.
Can I just follow up on this? It's just one thing I learned along my career, my life, is that we can be surprised. Many things I didn't expect to see just became reality in a few years. So there's no reason not to believe this is going to apply also to life outside of Earth. So I wouldn't be surprised if our first sign of extraterrestrial life was some probe being attacked by an animal on a planet that life was considered to be impossible. Because this, along my career, that has happened many, many times. I remember some 20 years ago, there are all the calculations about the swim bladder in fish, and how it works, and blah, 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 the molecular mechanisms, the dynamics, and people concluded it's impossible to have any swim bladder of fish below 6,000 meters, because the molecular mechanisms are simply not there. And everything seemed to support that. All the fish caught below 6,000 meters didn't have that. Until they went to a place where it was 8,000 meters, the deepest fish ever found, it had a swim bladder. So obviously it got there somewhere. We don't know how yet. No, after 10 years you don't yet know.
So the only thing that you were surprised is that you're no longer surprised.
Yeah, I'm
not surprised that you were always surprised.
Yeah, the surprise is perfectly predictable. What you cannot predict is the nature of the surprise.
Yeah.
So Mario, do you think that it's possible life without water?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Especially because we know so little about the behavior of macromolecules in this kind of environment. Who studies that? And in extreme conditions of temperature and pressure, strange liquids and combinations of liquids.
So this would change completely the habitable zone.
Physical scientists.
Also, there's something that we have there's a lot of, from what I can understand, there's a lot of interest here about oceans. We don't need ocean to have life the way we have in Earth. I mean, our ocean is pretty good, but you can do good with very little water actually.
Well, I would like our biologists to comment on this, but my understanding is that you need a liquid solvent,
Yes.
or at least you are much preferred to have a liquid solvent to make life. Just like when you break up your DNA and you put water in it and find itself again. If you do that in ice, it doesn't work as well. And given that, we can ask the question, well, what liquids does the cosmos give us? So what are the most abundant elements in the universe? Well, there's hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, neon.
Helium's too cold.
Helium is not going to be liquid. It's also only liquid under very high pressure, right? And neon is not very useful. It's inert, so is helium.
Okay.
So carbon and oxygen and hydrogen are your
Methane.
most likely elements by far. So what liquids can you make out of those? That's your question, right? And those are the liquids that are on the table to be life solvents, I think. So water's a good one. I'm not sure, I'll ask my biological colleagues, which other ones would you make out of those that would be good?
Methane?
Methane?
Yes,
Methane.
methane.
But isn't methane a gas under
But in
No,
Titan,
very
in Titan, for example.
But doesn't it have to be under high pressure, not just cold?
No,
Oh,
Because out in space, it's in gaseous form.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
But
I think
Fred-
Titan, they have
Fred-
rivers.
Fred-
In Titan, they have rivers of methane.
Okay.
At least they told us they do. I believe in the photograph, but I'm not sure if that was debunked somehow.
4 ATMs, more or less.
Four is not bad.
It's good.
Actually, in Titan is like
And
heat,
60
right?
Kelvin.
Methane
Okay,
oceans.
it has
Okay.
methane.
Liquid nitrogen as well.
Yeah, there's liquid nitrogen. There's
That's
quite a
too
bit of
cold.
nitrogen, even though it's not as abundant as the ones
Very
that.
cold.
The
Thank you.
problem with liquid hydrogen is it's too cold, so I don't think there's much reaction there. You know.
The thing is the thermodynamics that you need to put the molecules working together with the
Yes.
solvent.
Yeah.
That's the
Exactly.
question.
Yeah.
You need a solvent and you need some energy.
Yes.
So that
The
was qualifying
thermodynamics
into that.
would be less favorable at these very low temperatures. You would need another chemistry that would have the reaction channels, the proper reaction channels to make something useful to store information and the memory that we think life has.
Yeah.
And then is there people doing that, using perhaps this idea,
Yeah.
using the
Right.
correct solvent and the correct thermodynamics, and then trying to see how is it that we would
There are people working on methods like
get
that,
some
but
sort
I
of
don't know if they're so-
evolution?
Not at this level.
Yeah, I don't think there is really trying to answer how life would happen in Titan. I'm not sure if there's someone looking at this point of view. I don't know.
Because I guess that will be the thing that the astronomers would think about when we think of astrobiology. What is it that then we could go ahead and look for if life is not precisely how it is here, but what is it that we,
What
if we're
you're
gonna get to
gonna-
Titan,
If you
what
look
we
at,
look
I
at?
think we're gonna find out is that the people that work in complex reactions that happens with methane as a solvent. I think we have to work on those things. But then to go from that to something that's similar to life, that's a little too far.
Is that makes sense?
Oh, if I could just paraphrase what you're telling me, if you wanted to expand the mission of the astrobiologically oriented astronomers, we've been searching for spaces that allow for liquid water sort of in the back of our minds. That's sort of in the back of the mind of the whole astrobiology community. Should we expand our search to liquid environments as opposed to liquid water environments? Would you guys advocate that?
Definitely, definitely,
Yeah, I
especially
think
because
we should.
they're available.
So then this conference has actually produced a new product, right? We have a result. I think we can take the rest of the week off. No, no, this could be good. I mean, this could be interesting because that is something that nobody ever talks about. We should be searching for liquid environments, not only liquid water environments.
Yeah.
And if that's true, that's big.
Thank you. That's pretty good.
Fred, I saw in your book that you spent some lines talking about life in terms of information.
Yes.
Could you comment about something?
Well, there's a fundamental question about whether life depends on the actual architecture. In this case, we're talking about molecules in some liquid solvent, or is it just the information that, in that case, is conveyed by the molecular machinations, right? And just to put that in sort of a more practical question, the question is, can I take you? You have about 10 to the 27 particles in you, I counted them. And can I take all of the bits of information stored in those 10 to the 27th molecules and put them in a computer, including everything you're thinking right now in just the right way? And could I make a computer simulation that will then henceforth do everything that you will do? Or do anything, maybe not exactly what you would do, but do something that's qualitatively as cool as what you would do. And if the answer to that question is yes, then life is in fact fundamentally information. I can put it into a biological entity made of carbon and water, or I can put it into a computer made of silicon and wires, and I could still have the same thing. I don't know the answer to that. I was saying that there is that question. If the answer is information and not the architecture, not the need for carbon and water, then you can do several things. And I think I said this in the context of how long can we continue life? Because protons are going to decay in 10 to the 30-something years. So if protons decay, there's no carbon. If there's no carbon, carbon-based life is kind of hard. So the question is, could life possibly continue beyond proton decay? And the answer is, if it's information, if you have an information storage mechanism, which would have to be like black holes because they live longer. You need a lot of black holes to store that much information, but you could. Then you could have some kind of life continue longer. But if you need carbon and oxygen or carbon and water and that kind of thing, then the answer would be no. So I don't know the answer. I wish I do, but I don't.
But people are starting to store information, right? Now you can see, once in a while you see in the news that there's a guy that died and the friends got all of his emails, all of his tweets, all of his online presence, and they fed it into some sort of artificial intelligence thing, and now they talk to it, and it responds as that guy, because they have context about things that he would say because of the email interactions. If you are feeling this way, he would reply that way. So I guess it goes maybe together with artificial intelligence, that it could be a way to store this guy's thoughts and ideas and what he believed to be right and wrong. And
yeah, that's one step on the way towards what we were talking about. And artificial intelligence is trying to do just that.
Right.
Yeah.
Depending on what the answer to that question I posed is yes or no, it will tell us how far artificial intelligence can go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If the answer is it's all information, then artificial intelligence can go really far, and you might be really scared.
And we
But-
live in a we live in a simulation, right?
Well, that's a separate issue. There's another idea that we are just a computer simulation, and that we don't know it because the computer simulation is that good of code.
High resolution simulation.
It's very high resolution simulation. So you're some kid's science fair project in another universe. So.
Wake up, Neil.
Somebody argued that this cannot, I think it was you, that this could not be because nobody is such a good coder.
Oh.
They're always
I think the
bugs.
point is that nobody that we know, because maybe this coder made it such that we would never go against him or her.
All right,
No,
so-
I think what I said is that if we were living in a simulation, then one way you could tell would be bugs in the code, which would be discontinuities, momentary lapses in the laws of physics, right? Because clearly this universe, if it was a simulation, was coded to obey very particular laws of physics, the ones we've been talking about all week, right?
Yeah.
And those lead to the laws of biology that we're trying to understand and whatnot. So if we're in a simulation, there would be little glitches in that. We also said the glitches would look a lot like miracles of the Bible. I'll let you just chew on that.
So,
Well,
since-
we also said that the universe was created 4,000 years ago, and then the glitches were, debugged afterwards.
Oh, wow.
There's a difference between glitches and errors.
That is
Gross
too far,
errors.
too far.
Just let me just put this questions we're in this topic. All right, go ahead.
Let's finish this.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Why don't a black hole be a really big bug?
A really big bug?
A really big glitch on
Big,
our
big
universe?
glitch in the universe.
Yeah, like
No.
How we can describe it.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, black holes are a clean prediction of general
they're-
relativity.
Yeah.
And general relativity works pretty well, as LIGO has shown in one context recently, but
And it's a huge factor of information, right?
yeah. So, not necessarily it's the answer to your question.
So, since we're talking about this, I'm going to actually add some information to this question, because I actually collect some data for that. and then if we have time, I'll go back to this. So just have an idea of scale. We have that the moon was formed 4.57 billion years ago. Now, Mario told me this morning that they found, they're called graphite zircons.
Zircon crystals, yeah.
Zircon crystals, yeah. Which have evidence for organic, it's not necessarily life, but organic byproducts. And
carbon, yeah. Carbon, I think it has a low rate of heavy to light carbon isotopes.
So they survive.
And it's usually a product of biogenesis, but not always.
Okay.
So many people don't believe this.
But they survive more than the oldest rocks, which the oldest rocks are 3.8 billion years ago, and the stromatolites fossils are 3.7 billion years ago. Okay, so I'll go back to the question. just to give the idea that apparently something has been bugging me. Life, and according to you, with something out of the water, life can appear extremely fast. It can survive, it has perseverance, and so on. So the question is, what is your personal solution? So it's a question for all four of you, to the Fermi paradox. The Fermi paradox, for those who don't know, is, as we have been showing here in the previous...
do you want the microphone? Oh, okay.
Yeah. In the previous event is the fact that if we have 10 to the 11, I think now 10 to the 12 stars in the galaxy, each one has several planets. Planets form all the time. We have all these ingredients. They are already in the clouds that Fred was talking about, water and everything else fall on Earth and appears immediately. So the question is, if there is life everywhere, some of them will be technological, so why aren't they here? So Fermi, this became famous, the Fermi paradox, from Enrico Fermi. And so in the Wikipedia, the question is long actually. In the Wikipedia, they suggest several possibilities, and I'll list them and then I'll hear your opinion. Extraterrestrial life is rare or non-existent. No other intelligent species have a reason. Intelligent alien species lack advanced technology. It is the nature of intelligent life to destroy itself. It is the nature of intelligent life to destroy others. Periodic extinction by natural events. Resource depletion and climate change. Inflation hypothesis and the youngness argument. I'm not sure about I don't even know what that is. Intelligent civilizations are too far apart in space or time. It is too expensive to spread physically throughout the galaxy. Human beings have not existed long enough. Humans are not listening properly. Civilizations broadcast detectable radio signals only for a brief period of time. They tend to isolate themselves, they meaning the aliens. They are too alien. Everyone is listening, no one is transmitting. Earth is deliberately not contacted.
This is the better answer.
TV show.
This is the better answer.
What's on TV, they probably don't want to talk about this.
Earth is purposely isolated. It's called the planetarium hypothesis. It is dangerous to communicate. I like that one. They are here undetected. They are here unacknowledged.
Oh, undetected.
So we can start from there.
Or you have a theory though, Fred? Do you not want to put that forward?
Yeah, but I'll let you go first.
Okay. So there was how many? 20? Okay. Now, okay. From an observational point of view, so what have we found? We've found that potentially there's more, let's say, habitable planets in the universe, at least in the galaxy, than there are stars, sun-like stars that potentially host them. That's a possibility. So statistical fluke is, for me, very difficult to see. I don't think we can be the only life form, let's say, in the universe. I think that's difficult. But it's not zero. I mean, it's not completely impossible. It just seems, with the quantity of planets that we could have that are habitable, it seems very unlikely. So the fact that we say we don't see or we don't know of any intelligent life means that if I believe, or I think, a reason that there is life elsewhere in the galaxy then, or the universe, then somehow we haven't contacted it because of time spans, or somehow it's already here or been here and we don't acknowledge it. Now we discussed something that I know Renat was going to bring up about if we send, let's say, probes or robots that can basically, what are they called? Self-replicate.
They're called von Neumann machines.
That's the one, yeah, which can self-replicate, and they jump to another planet or an asteroid, and they self-replicate, and they do that over and over and over again. Doesn't take too long until they've basically visited the entire, every planet in the galaxy, or at least, let's say, every habitable planet in the galaxy. Now, the question, maybe that has happened. We already have nanotechnology, and we're only a very young space-bearing civilization. So maybe those things, maybe they're here, or maybe they've been here, and we can't see them. What if they're buried under the ice sheets of Antarctica? Or it only takes one of those machines that it would be very difficult for us to find, right? So I'm kind of dancing around an answer here because I don't really have an answer for it. It's quite difficult to answer, in the sense that it's probably, the likelihood is it's a longevity effect, and that we've just not been intelligent, if we call it intelligent, long enough, and that maybe these things do wipe themselves out. And I'm going to wait until everybody's spoken, because we had a very long discussion and argument, and I seem to be an optimist about human longevity and stuff, so I'm going to let others speak.
So my solution, or at least the one I'll put forth, is slightly different. I think that space travel, especially traveling at the civilization level, is much more difficult than we tend to think. We watch too much Star Trek, Star Wars episodes where you go at warp 9 and whatnot. But in reality, just getting to Alpha Cent, there's a way you might be able to send like a computer chip there or a camera, but sending you there is pretty daunting, right? So, my hypothesis is that it's actually easier to understand biology, even though we're not there yet, and easier to understand solving the problems on a planet than it is to do interstellar space travel. If that's the case, then a civilization who's developing technology and intelligence will figure out biology and figure out its environmental problems before it figures out space travel. And if that's the case, it will understand that once we understand biology, whatever you put on a planet is going to have this distribution of life forms that will fill all the ecological niches, however evolution is going to play out. It doesn't do you any good to go there yourself, because a million years later it's going to be the same anyway. It's going to fill all those niches. So the only intelligent thing to do is to stay home. Now you guys do this yourself. If you're like sitting in your living room drinking beer and watching the football game, you don't go out and like kill this anthill just because you can. There's no advantage to it, right?
Some people do when they're young.
Yeah, when they're young, but they usually grow out of it, right? And what I'm saying here is that the civilizations will grow out of that before they come and conquer us.
Some grow up to kill people.
Yeah.
Go out and have fun killing people.
Thinking about an evolutionary pressure, though, would be we're pressured to expand.
Well, yes and no. There's evolutionary pressure to expand, but there's evolutionary pressure to expand to where you can live and thrive.
Right. Survive.
So there's this romanticism about going to Mars. I don't want to go to Mars. I want to go to the beach. Seriously, what's going to be more fun? Maybe I'll go to Tahiti. Maybe I'll go to Hawaii. I don't want to go to the moon. There ain't nothing there. I don't see the advantage of it. It does not sound fun. It does not sound like the place I'm going to thrive. It's a stunt.
Yeah, but
there's more land under the ocean than there is on Mars. Why are we going to Mars? It makes no sense.
Yeah, but people are different. They got like 70,000 candidates for a one-way ticket to Mars. Send them, yeah, but there you go. I'm going to
Fred, but you don't believe that terraformation is possible in Mars, and so after some 1,000 years we can find some nice places there to go, no?
Nice beach resorts.
Yeah, something like that. What do you think?
In a few thousand years.
I think we're better off saving this planet.
Yeah,
it's just my take.
Yeah.
I think maybe our only option.
Yeah.
It's the best option.
Yeah.
We got a nice planet here.
Oh, it's beautiful, yeah. Earth is a beautiful planet. We
But
should
the
take better care of it. Yeah.
But the problem is the human being.
Well, as for my answer to the paradox, well, I first will say something paradoxical. I know how many times life originated in the universe. Once. The same as how many times mammals originated? Once. Bony fish, once. Insects, once. Life, as we know, it is a historical phenomenon, just like any other biological group. So it originated once here. What you're talking about is things that are similar to life in other planets that we look and say it's the same level of organization. So in a historical way, you have to see it this way. That's why I think it can be very different. Of course, it can be a system phenomenon, not just Earth, but it originated in the protoplanetary disk, or whatever. The first chemical evolution was there, but it's still life. It's the same thing. Once you get to something that's completely independent, even if it mimics life, in a way, mimics not the right word, but it parallels life. It's still parallel. It's still convergence. It's not the same thing. So, is it possible that you have phenomena that are very similar to life on Earth? Yes, I think it's very likely that it happens. Because matter gets organized and goes on, and so the right conditions are there. Now, as to the Fermi paradox, my idea, I thought it was mine, but actually it's one of the ones you listed, is because I think life, especially technological life, or more particularly technological life, is a blink. Life can last for a long time, but civilizations and species usually don't. They're very fast. So we have been technological in the sense we talk about, so able to communicate with something outside for what, 50 years, 60 years.
Yeah, the Olympic Games in Berlin, first sent signals.
Yeah. And our civilization may already be downhill. I don't know exactly. When I was a kid, I thought in year 2000 we would be making trips to the moon like every weekend if we wanted. It didn't happen. You guys are all very young, so you had never saw this. But I'm from the 60s, so I thought, when I'm 35 years old, I'll go to Mars for the end of the year. It never happened. I mean, we had been to the moon at 69. I mean, I was 4 years old. Of course, everybody believed by year 2000 would be going everywhere very easily. Everything would be moved by energy from fusion, nuclear fusion. All environmental problems would be resolved. People would live for thousands of years. Nothing of that happened. So obviously, the curve of technology of the 50s, the post-World War, Second World War, didn't stay that way. It is decaying.
No, we got refocus.
Okay, it's different, but I mean the problems are all there. The same old problems. We didn't solve anything. People are still dying of stupid causes, and civilizations are very unpleasant places to live and things like that. So I think they're very ephemeral. So just to finish my reasoning, very ephemeral to communicate. They come and die, and so in order to have two civilizations communicating, they would have to be at the peak at the same time. So they actually are in time for whatever speed they use in communication to have an answer. Otherwise, there's just nobody to listen and nobody to see your message. That's.
I think recognizing it's a big issue as well. To recognize I think maybe even to recognise some kind of spacefaring life form may be difficult. I'm not saying there's anything here, but if we're really thinking way outside the box, these things may not be flying around in Warp 9 spacecraft. I mean, they may be, I don't know.
Oh yeah. What if the Neumann machine is actually microscopic?
Right. That's what nanotechnology.
Yeah.
But there could already be technology on Earth that's non.
We have no idea.
We have no idea. It's so small, so difficult to find.
Right, but the original 4 Neumann machines, they at the time people wrote this. They're not thinking about nanoscopic. They're thinking about big ones. They will come to a system, go to some place where there isn't material, like the asteroid belt. Start destroying that and make another 4 Neumann machine, and send somewhere else, and make another one, send somewhere else. So that's how you grow. But I never thought of a nanoscopic. Yeah. Suppose what you need is really so small that
they may be
much more efficient.
Listening to this conversation.
Listening to all this. Yeah.
They're about to invade.
And laughing.
There's a question there.
No, you just mentioned what I would like to say, because in our civilization, in our planet, we have groups living in different times. So if you go to some isolated tribes, or they live in a different time that we knew, with different technology and everything.
Even our technology civilization is not really for everybody.
Yes.
So this question, you put me this in 1987, something like that. That's about 10 years ago. And he bugged me for weeks about this because he was so impressed with that paper. I remember. And I think I'll give you the same answer, although perhaps a little more elaborated. Anyway, and I agree with you about one thing. I don't think we slow down in the technological evolution. I think we even faster, just not going to space. I mean, in 1966, 2001 Space Odyssey was considered to be a realistic view of the future.
Yeah.
And Panam was flying to the space station. That not happened. However, nobody imagined that we can have a supercomputer in your pocket.
Yes, we do.
No, not in 2001.
People are talking with images
no, that's
to each other across the universe.
No.
It's just was considered just trivial.
No, that's
to make
so.
a movie.
I think this was completely different from
Well,
what
the
I
details,
imagined.
yes, but communications. Nobody
I
talks
think
communications.
it's different.
I mean,
Anyway,
in 2001, the guy sits and talks to his son on Earth.
Yeah, that's evolution for telephone to them. But anyway, I'll ask the question. And perhaps there is a monolith somewhere in the solar system, I don't know, but I don't think it's possible, and I will tell you why. Like someone said, I think Fred told, people underestimate how costly it is to send something to another star. It's a huge endeavor. It will take forever. I mean, take hundreds of years. Even, I mean, people are not talking about using a laser sail to send something very small.
Starshot.
A Starshot that they call? Yeah, I still don't know how they will communicate back with us because then they will send a golf ball to Proxima Centauri and we had to have some feedback information. I don't know how they do that. But anyway, the problem is not that. If you want to send a von Neumann machine to replicate in Proxima Centauri and then go on and on and on, that takes forever. So it will not be the lifetime of the people who built this machine. So the advantage of building the machine in the first place is dubious.
But yeah, and it depends how you travel.
Yeah, no, I'll continue. Then the machine will replicate thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times to cover the galaxy. If it replicates itself, it's making copies. The copies are never perfect. So it will have some sort of technical evolution. I mean, it's quite possible that after a while they gave up their mission and find something better to do.
Can I just, before we pass there, I know this answer, and they did to Tipler, and I can give you the counter answer.
Okay.
You have a file. So the counter answer for this is that you only need one machine to succeed and start making 2 or 3. Then if one decides to not do anything, it doesn't matter anymore. You just need one civilization. You could also say that out of the many civilizations, only one of them, nobody's going to invest in this. You just need one to do it. You know, one machine, one civilization, and the price they estimated for the machine was using the 30-year-old money. It was not a fast machine like Starshot. It's just you do once, send it, forget about it. And it was about, I guess, a few million years, perhaps.
Yes, I remember a few million years.
Maybe something like this. Then you have this ridiculous amount of information getting from every single place.
That no one who was alive there, I don't think there's enough incentive to make this endeavor. And there's a lot of other things that can go. I mean, missions that takes millions of years, hundreds of thousands of generations, all things can go wrong about determining them. But one thing I have to say, if they might have passed here before and left the monolith because there was no human life here, so they don't care and went away, that's cool. Or they can check out, hey, there are now a civilization there, let's go there. That'd be scary, man, because every time a civilizations clash, the weaker one gets screwed.
Okay. So,
well, can I just summarize? I think if we think about everything that everybody talked about, I think they're all very valid points. But if if this intelligent life that is similar to life, I guess, that we know, that really doesn't want to leave because it's hard, it's costly, and things. We need to have civilizations existing at the same time so that we could communicate. There is also, if they're anywhere similar to life as we are, they will also wait until the last absolutely moment to do this, like the 15 minutes before the deadline, because we are creating our planet and we are not really working that hard until maybe sending something somewhere else. So I guess that maybe we would never get the answer because we are going to do this so close to the deadline that by the time that these millions of years pass and the answer comes back, well, we are no longer here.
This is called the great filter in this context. The great filter is a time in the biological evolution that you cannot cross, or just very few species in the universe can cross. So the great filter is used to express this. We can be. The question is, we are beyond the great filter already, or we are getting closer to the great filter. So the great filter will discard many possible biological life.
Well, the question is what the filter is, right?
Yeah, maybe this one that we are living in. Oh, what about the planets we are living? We are living like a cancer, so the cancer will die, as probably we can die. But yeah, the great filter is in this context. I have opinion about this, of course. I think the biological life, we have to surpass the biological life in some sense to live further. I think there can be, of course, there can be already different kind of possible intelligence in the universe, but it's not in our context. We cannot make context because we are still in the biological form. So if life is in the information form, we cannot have context with it, and the universe can be full of information life, but we cannot make contact. So this is the great filter. Probably we can surpass the biological form, living as a computer, as information. So in this sense, that's why we cannot. We don't see anybody.
Okay. Okay. Question.
Can I ask you something in Portuguese and someone translate?
Sure.
Considerando que vocês são biólogos e astrônomos são cientistas de alto escalão, digamos assim, e considerando o assunto
muito dinheiro nisso, no meu caso.
E considerando também um assunto que a gente está debatendo aqui agora sobre vida fora do planeta e tudo mais, o que vocês acham sobre a ufologia hoje? Sobre essas aparições no mundo inteiro, sobre esses vídeos, relatos, coisas desse tipo?
Okay,
well,
I should translate so they can hear it.
Yeah. All right. So he's saying that since, assuming that we are great, so what's the status of the evidence for UFOs?
Okay. Not much.
No, zero as far as I know. Nothing.
Most cases can be explained by different things, sleep paralysis and things like that. I think there's zero.
There's no
really the suggestion that that they're actually being visited by aliens of some sort.
Eu estou perguntando isso porque nós aqui no Brasil, nós temos a Força Aérea Brasileira, e não sei se vocês sabem, cerca de 1 ano, 2 anos atrás, a FAB disponibilizou na internet mais de 7.000 páginas em arquivos sobre assuntos ufológicos da própria Força Aérea Brasileira. Que nesses arquivos eles falam sobre contato direto com extraterrestres aqui, em várias missões secretas aqui no Brasil. E isso está disponível na internet, se vocês quiserem. Tem um site chamado Ufologia, Revista UFO, do Eduardo Gevaer, ele fala sobre isso em vários assuntos. E eu estou perguntando isso porque meu pensamento pessoal é que uma organização como uma força como a Força Aérea Brasileira disponibilizar isso para a gente, pessoas civis, e a gente não ter parar para estudar sobre isso e ter uma visão sobre isso, será que não tem alguma coisa?
You realize that most cases of UFO unidentified flying objects by whatever who identified them. They're unidentified. They see a light and say, oh, that's a UFO. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying this is a saucer of some sort.
Yes.
I can give you a number.
He's quoting, his story is similar in different places. He's quoting the Brazilian Air Force, apparently released some documents some time ago that would indicate that they had contacts with aliens, blah, 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 blah.
No, they have in several occasions
So, yeah, sure.
Contato direto, contato direto, não simplesmente visualização
Okay, so
no céu.
this is a very debatable thing. So let me just ask try to make it shorter so we can go through the other questions. This happened in many places in the world. Area 51 in the US, they open, all the information is out there, and still the same thing. So the question is, does anybody here know of any kind of observation that have any indication that any unidentified flying object is actually a spaceship from outer space? Anybody here?
Okay, no, but I was just going to come back through the war. For instance, the Second World War, there was a lot of reports by fighter pilots and stuff. And so I think it was the American Air Force or the American Navy. I think it was the American Air Force looked into they had to look into it because there were so many reports from pilots. And they found, so the number you want to quote for UFOs if you want, but remember, UFO is not an alien at all. It's just, when they really looked at all of these reports, and there was a lot of them, thousands, they found 5% they couldn't identify by natural phenomenon or technology they knew about. Now that 5% are likely to be something else that we could understand. They just couldn't prove what they were. But if you want to take away a number, that's a number that the US Air Force would give you. But it's a UFO, not an alien or anything like that.
And I'm sure that if they do deal with the Air Force, the Air Force is going to be the same thing.
I have one very quick take on this one. I was invited a couple times to this UFO meetings, and I decided to take the invitation 3 times. So the people said, are you sure you want me to be there? Because I'll say something on the other hand. They said, no, please come. I was with Javier 3 or 4 times. And then people come with this kind of information, and I said, anytime you have something concrete, give me a phone call, send me an email, send a drone message, and I'll go anywhere that you have something serious to discuss. I did that 5 times with people from abroad, from here. I never got a call. So even people from the Chilean Air Force, which showed a nice video, things weird to describe, and I said, if you want to discuss that, let's go over. I'll fly to Chile. I'll get a leave of absence from INPE, and I'll go discuss. Anytime. It never happened that I got a second call to put this information on the table. I'll be very happy to discuss with anybody who has something serious to go after. And Javier invited me once for a meeting in Curitiba, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, with Eric von Däniken was there.
Wow. Okay, all right. So
I was at the round table with von Däniken, you know.
Let's go back to some more concrete questions. So Starshot, going back to Starshot, what are the main difficulties? You're increasing the maximum speed ever obtained by about 3,000 times to go to Alpha Centauri. Going from horses to New Horizon is about 3,000 times enhancement in over 1.5 centuries. How do you intend to get this in such a short period of time?
I'm not an engineer. But, yeah, I think the biggest problem they had. I mean, the technology is theoretically exists. When I say theoretically, not just theoretically, it's tried to be tested. So it's solar cell technology to ride essentially momentum with photons. In this case, they're going to build a giant laser on the Earth and blast these little things all the way to Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri. And I only know of 2 countries that tried in space, and that I think so. The US and Russia tried. The US, I think their cell malfunctioned, so I don't think the tests were ever done properly. And I didn't read any results from the Russian tests, so I can't speculate on it. But I don't think the technology is so far away is so far away as we think. At least solar sail technology now, building giant lasers to blast these things across the universe, that's a different story. And I don't really want to speculate on that. But if you talk to Yuri Milner, then he's quite optimistic, as I guess Russian billionaires usually are. So,
All right, another one. So the solar system radioactive elements require a 25 solar masses supernova in the regional cluster. Would it also be consistent with a couple of less massive supernovae? If the lifetime of these elements is so long, could they be in the original cloud that created already present in the original cloud that created the solar system cluster?
Okay, I think that one's for me. The idea is that when our solar system was formed, you see the daughter products of short-lived radioactive elements, especially aluminum-26 and iron-60. The half-life of those elements is about 1 million years, okay? So that means that the production and capture of those elements in the solar nebula and their incorporation into rocks has to happen on a timescale of order 1 million years. If you wait much longer than that, they will have decayed, and the chemistry of the daughter products is different than the chemistry of the parent products, so you won't see the same signature. So that all has to happen in 1 million years. So in order for that to happen, you have to be close. So it's unlikely for all of that material to be in the molecular cloud, because it takes millions of years for the molecular cloud to condense, and then, as we saw, it takes 1 million years for the magnetic fields to diffuse out, for the collapse to take place, and so on. So it's very hard, timing-wise, to have that short-lived radioactive population be pre-existing. There is a way to do it, which I didn't have time to talk about in the talk yesterday, but it's not very economical. Because of what I just said, because of that timing issue, you can overcome the timing issue with brute force. So instead of having one supernova, you have a molecular cloud that has 1,000 supernovae. And then you're like enriching the hell out of the cloud, and you have short-lived radioactive species left, right, and sideways. Some of the subsequent generations can then be born in a region that has such an enrichment that you can explain what we see. But instead of needing one supernova, you need 1,000. But they can be a previous generation, but not too previous, otherwise you still have the timing issue. So that scenario, which is called distributed enrichment, does work, but it's not very economical. So you're pretty much stuck with having supernova enrichment, of at least some supernova enrichment, within the same birth cluster. Now the other part of the question was, can you get away with smaller stars instead of one big one? And I think you can play those off to some extent. If you need more smaller ones rather than one big one in terms of the statistical likelihood, it doesn't really change the story very much. It doesn't help your odds very much. But there is some leeway in mixing and matching those. And what adds to that is that not only are some of the elements produced by the supernova, all of the iron-60 has to be produced by the supernova, but some of the other ones can be produced in part by spallation. And that gives you some leeway. If some of them are produced by spallation, that gives you some leeway to have slightly different progenitor masses. So there is some flexibility there. But I think the most likely thing is some supernova enrichment in the same cluster is the most likely thing.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you another question then, or perhaps this is for James. What would be the effect of tidal locking, because you mentioned tidal locking in the Praxton Centauri, on A, the origin of life, B, the maintenance of pre-existing life?
Sure, this is for me. Okay.
Well, for you.
I think it's for, I can say a few things on tidal locking, but I'm not sure I can suggest nothing about the origin of life here. So yeah, well, I guess I can put the question across to the biologists in the sense that, well, tidal locking, let's look at what can happen. If we've got an Earth, let's take Earth as a canonical example that we've been doing. We've got an Earth-like atmosphere. So the question, I guess, is can we have life on that planet if, let's say, we have no heat redistribution? So if we're if we're talking about an M dwarf here, we have to be very close, so we have to be tidally locked. So can we have life that's being where we have a planet that's half baked, so it's really hot on one side, stiflingly hot, and ice on the other side, with some kind of ring around a terminator where the conditions would be quite nice, in fact. But the reality is that probably if it's got an atmosphere like the Earth, what we're going to see is really strong winds. We're going to have heat redistribution around that. So it might actually be quite a nice place, but pretty damn windy at some level. So now whether that's good for the two other guys here for life to evolve, I'll pass it across to them and see what their response is.
Yeah, I can imagine like science fiction scenarios in which you have systems of caves where air or fluid passes from one side to the other, with the energy gradient between the two, and it might be possible to have conditions there for life, even life similar to the one we have on Earth. But if you ask me for parallels on Earth for something like that, I would say the summer and winter in the Arctic and Antarctica. They're more or less like that. It's not permanent, but they stay for a long time with the sun on the horizon, and they stay a long time with the sun not touching the horizon. So, and life is there. So yeah, life is perfectly able to support a continuous supply of radiating energy.
Extremes, like real extremes, I guess.
Yeah, and I think at the border you would have conditions which are more or less intermediary. So yeah, I don't see that as imperative out of hand. I think it might be possible. I remember a book by Kurt Vonnegut, where he simulates a trip throughout the solar system. It's a very complicated book. It's Sirens of Titan.
Oh, yeah,
and he has life in Mercury. Mercury is how do you call it? Tidally locked, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, Mercury is like that, and he finds life there in the caves. Yeah, since Mercury is subject to such tremendous gravitational forces from the sun, it vibrated. That's how he described it. And there are these creatures which are more like Mesozoans. They would just stay stuck to the wall, draining on the energy of the planet, sound energy, and that's how they made energy for themselves. Very simple sort of life, but it was there. So it's not impossible, this kind of scenario. Energy comes from many sources, and even abandoned nuclear cores can support life. So yeah.
Actually, I think it can be pretty mild if it's far enough from the star and have an atmosphere, perhaps ocean. The circulation of air in the atmosphere and circulation of the ocean itself, it can be pretty mild. Most of the planet, including the dark side. So I guess it have a very large zone of life can live in good conditions. So I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the ocean doesn't freeze at night.
No, I don't think so. And even if it freezes in the dark side, it will have a crust of ice, but not the whole ocean. Inside will be alive. I have a question to you. In the same thing, when I watched your presentation, you said that Proxima Centauri flares 68 times per minute or something like that. Is that
per day?
Okay, per day. Okay, it's still a lot. Is the energy that received from the star, the planet will be too uneven? This could be a problem?
Well, at least it maintains its atmosphere. Let's say that. At least if it maintains its atmosphere. If it has an atmosphere, tenuous, Earth-like, then it won't lose its atmosphere. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Right. No, the calculations that I showed a calculation. It's just a simulation, of course, but they said it would maybe up to an Earth's ocean worth of oxygen that would be lost, if you like it like that. It wouldn't. It's no impediment to have, let's say, water world or an atmosphere, just basically. Okay. So yeah. But yeah, Proxima's a bit crazy. If it really is constantly flaring, if it really is a flare every 20 minutes and the flare lasts half an hour, then that's a hell of an environment to be in. Like a lot of energy changes of your life, high X-ray flux, etc., bathing the planet. Does the planet have a magnetic field? That's another thing I didn't actually talk about, and I maybe should have talked about, was that another thing is we don't know if Proxima b has a magnetic field, and is magnetic fields important to protect planets? Particularly if you're on a flaring star and you've got a lot of high energy particles hitting the planet, is a strong magnetic field necessary to protect that? Are we going to irradiate such that we're sterilising planets, or if we want to talk about it like that, or even does magnetic fields actually drive these energetic particles just to the poles, and then you have essentially more deposits of energy in the polar regions? Well, I maybe should have talked about magnetic fields, I forgot, but that's another important question to consider.
After this, listening to you guys, I have the impression that the second part of the question is probably yes. I mean, once life appeared, I have the impression from what I heard, it doesn't matter. It adapts to anything. The tardigrade, resistant to radiation, those things in Chernobyl. I think once it appears, it becomes a pest. That's crazy. And so the question, the first question is the main problem. Can it appear? Something like that. That's a speculative.
It seems hard to eradicate.
Right.
If not impossible.
If not impossible.
Yeah. I think Mars is completely contaminated already. And the moon too. Because it's virtually impossible to eliminate bacteria from any of these things that go there.
They baffle radiation, those probes.
It's not enough. They discovered it's not enough.
No, that's what
But they thought, yeah, they do that, but they just discovered
But
it's
that's
not.
what I was telling you. I mean, they do that now. Do you know that the Russians send probes in their
Oh,
own
I can imagine.
Yeah,
Like
that's the one.
Why did they send rats there? Cockroaches. Mars is full of cockroaches everywhere. Oh, you're better off going to Hawaii. That's right, yeah.
You don't need to go that far.
If you see a picture of Titan, it's amazingly similar to Hawaii.
It's colder though. So, you may find the water a little sticky.
All right, so next question. I like that Fred, that's specifically to Fred, talks more about the 9th planet of the solar system. I guess it's planet 9, focusing on theories of why it was ejected.
It was my question, but I think that it was already be answered here before.
Okay.
Right. So I think you can jump your questions because all that is there was already answered here.
Okay.
Unless Fred's got something to say.
Yeah, they have something to add.
Oh, well, we talked earlier about part of the story. The one thing that I'd just like to emphasize is that making Planet 9 is difficult. And by making it, I mean not just making a 10 Earth mass rocky thing like we think it is, but getting it into that particular orbit, because it has a semi-major axis of 600 AU. So as we saw through my set of talks, disks generally don't extend out that far. Our solar system disk probably didn't extend much beyond Neptune at 30 AU. So there's no real estate to make a planet 600 AU away. So that means you have to make it elsewhere and move it to that orbit. And the options to making it and moving it are to make it in the giant planet region and then scatter it out. But if you do that, you're very unlikely to scatter it all the way out to 600 AU, because 600 AU is almost infinity. So it's like scattering almost all the way out, but not quite. Chances are most of the time you'll just let it keep going. So that means you're going to probably scatter it out to a couple hundred AU at most, and then you have to have a passing star come and change its orbit again to get it into this elliptical 600 AU thing. Alternately, you can either capture it from another star, capture Planet 9 from another star in the Earth cluster, or capture it as a freely floating planet. And that's what we talked about earlier at the beginning of this discussion, where that's a 1% effect, or maybe a couple percent effect. And I made the point that a couple percent effects happen. So that's probably what happened, but it is the problem. That's the most important, or the most problematic aspect of making up this planet, is the question of how did it get there?
So it's probably.
All right. So the next question, when we look for life, extraterrestrial life, we're looking for real life for biomarkers. Generally, you just search for carbon and silicon. I'm not sure what silicon, but this wouldn't it be restricting the searches? So let me go to the next question. That one probably will couple with the other one. I think that on Earth, life might have appeared several times, and the carbon life that went right works until nowadays. So basically, I guess there are two questions here. One is, what are the markers that look for life? And the second is, could life have appeared on Earth many times? And you can couple to this, is there any evidence for life that had a different origin on Earth? Life too.
Yeah, I think it's possible, because extinction is so rampant that when competition begins, most of the players actually go extinct, and then you have one which is the winner, quote in quotations, that is just the one who survived. Yeah, that's it, yeah. Over time, this tends to happen. So if life appeared on one side, this means that it's possible that life appears in those conditions on Earth. So it could have originated elsewhere. The problem is that once you have a foothold on the environment, that's a big advantage. You tend to spread a lot throughout all the environments and you become dominant eventually. That's normal in many ecological situations of living systems. In an empty world, the first replicating molecule would be everywhere, where it had suitable conditions very fast. Because the Earth was very dynamic at the time, it would go everywhere, and just go everywhere. So any subsequent origins of life would have limited resources to use. Once you have, but let's say this life too made it through this period, then you start having modular heredity and things like that that characterize life as you know it. And then it becomes a lot harder because then you begin to add competition, and well, if it survives or not, it's a matter of contingency on the planet. The fact that today we don't have any example of that. All life seems to be derived from the same common ancestor. Yeah.
It's also pretty possible that in the beginning you have proper DNA with something we'll call life, and there are life 2, 3, 4, 5, but life 1 just outcompete everything else, and then they're not a survivor.
But doesn't that assume that they are looking for the same resources?
No, but if you have very simple life based in DNA, they probably are very similar too. We have different origins, but you have to understand there is a point that no organic chemistry become organic chemistry, and that's very difficult to say what's the point that this happens. Probably we have to say that there is something that, like DNA, that replicates and transmits information.
We can say that.
Yeah.
We can say that it is the number that I gave you in the beginning. It becomes organic at 4.1 billion years ago, and the moon is formed at 4.6, so very fast.
Well, yes.
It's organic.
Basically, just after the moon formation, I mean, because it was again, it was a very hot situation, and Earth became cold again. Life appeared just after that. It was very fast, yes. But you can have very prototypes of life in the very beginning, and one of them outcompete the others. You know, there's several funky theories about origin of life, not the ones, I mean, there's the main ones and there's also some alternatives. People think crazy things like crystals predate life because they can replicate and they can create complex forms. There are all sort of weird science about that. It might be not wrong, it's just not conventional.
That being said, I would also add that we know very little about microbial life on Earth. Very, very little. The bacteria, the viruses, the really small forms of life are very, very poorly known. We know a few thousand. We know there are millions of them. So have we checked everything everywhere? No. No. If we look for these very rare animals, it took a long time to discover them, and they're big, like the coelacanth and things like that. They only occur in very specific environments, very difficult to reach. So most of the bacteria that we know are bacteria that are either useful to us or causes some trouble, some disease. Those are the bacteria we know. And the bacteria that we can cultivate in petri dishes. The majority of bacteria cannot be cultivated in petri dishes, so these are mostly unknown. There are bacteria in extreme environments that we don't know. There are bacteria at the bottom of the ocean that decompose cellulose that we don't know, and they only exist there based on wood that comes from Earth. So this kind of odd things occurs everywhere. Is it possible that there is some different form of life that has not been checked yet to see if they actually are based on DNA. Many, yeah. This is an assumption. We say, oh yeah, every living being on Earth is DNA. That's an assumption. Nobody has seen all the taxa, really. There are many things that we haven't seen yet. Oh, we assume it is, and I even believe it is, but there are things that we don't know yet. And there are many, 90% we don't know.
It's good to understand that there are a lot of species that are undiscovered, not described. I mean, I described a dozen of them. You probably described a couple dozen too.
Oh, yeah.
And we work with vertebrates. If we work with insects, we'll probably describe 100 of them, each one of those during our careers. If you go to the garden here and try some bacteria, I'm pretty sure you'll find a new species there easily. Not one, a dozen probably. The amount of our lack of knowledge about this is huge, and there is no human resource to study everything. That's the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what Mary said. I mean, if you're a microbiologist, say, hey, I want to study diversity of microbiology. Okay, do you want to kill them? Because that's what the money is for. How are we going to kill them? They affect the cattle, they affect men, they affect what? That's what people are looking for.
Yeah. Just to complete that before I forget, we don't even know the microbes that live on us. On us. They now have the Human Microbiota Project, just to begin to understand how many bugs live on us, because we don't know yet. Thousands. And there are bacteria that are specialized in the belly button. They only live in the belly button. Others are specialized in your armpits. We have between the wrist and the elbow 300 different species of bacteria. None of them described. From the elbow to the armpits, we have another 500 undescribed still. We don't know the number because we make analysis of DNA fragments and this is all different species. We don't even know what they are. So it's incredible, the amount of things. And this is only bacteria, and nematodes, acari, all kinds of things. You know, we are huge colonies of living things when you don't know what lives on us.
And you go to the bottom of the ocean and go and drag a little
Yes. So can you imagine what to find in the mud from the bottom of the ocean? So yeah, there are lots of things we don't know. We will be surprised.
Yeah, Alex?
Oh yeah.
Probably, I'd say that you would not need to go that far. Life as we do not know it might be just a chain of polarization in the DNA molecule, just a different pairing between the bases, just one single chemical element in the DNA structure would be life as we do not know it. It would be very similar to what we know it. It could survive inside volcanoes, inside, acid ponds, inside of the bottom of the ocean, would be like thousands of different things. You don't need to go far.
Yeah, like the genetic code. Everybody says it's universal, it's universal, it's universal. This kind of research, which is very expensive and very difficult, nobody ever checked all that.
Yeah.
We assume it is the same.
Well, we check this like that.
We are beginning to find a few which are not.
Yeah.
There are exceptions sometimes.
That's what you might
Archaea,
comment.
yeah.
I would probably ask maybe the four of you, but there is this life as we do not know. It's something that's becoming a common expression between biochemistry and between molecular biologists. And there is something that I saw very recently, that people have become to synthesize life. There's a group in Harvard with us, I think his name is Chad Shostak. And he's been working on synthesizing RNA, which can replicate in the lab. I don't know if you've heard of that. I didn't have time to go through the papers, but I've heard there's a list of publications.
Yeah.
Maybe you can comment on that.
There is a current that thinks that RNA become before the DNA. So, but I don't know much about it. But there are people saying this. I probably read exactly what you read here, but I haven't gone to the papers here.
Yeah, the thing is that's not synthesize, but make them reproduce. That's the focal point.
And the funny thing is that DNA basically code proteins, and those proteins kind of universal, but we use just a small set of the possible proteins.
Yeah.
So it could be possible to have very
Yeah,
different
they claim
lines.
that they can code themselves. RNA can code itself and reproduce from that point on.
I was saying that
That struck me
we might
hard.
have very similar life to us, but very different too, because use a different set of proteins. So basically, the same building blocks, you can have very different chemistry. We haven't found it, but there are some odd things we find out there.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my talk, most people believe that the origin of life must be related to some RNA-like molecule.
Yeah.
Because to make the DNA, you need enzymes. To make enzymes, you need DNA. So you stay in that catch-29 situation. What RNA, no, ribosomal RNA is a ribozyme. It acts as a nucleic
The
acid,
hardware.
but it also is an enzyme. So it seems to fit the needs for a very independent molecule that would be able to self-replicate. And since that P region that I showed is so conservative everywhere we look at it, in every animal virus, and everywhere there's that protein, it is the same, that RNA, it is the same. So it seems to be a very ancient part of life. So maybe, yeah, I believe the RNA, origin of life, or something similar to RNA is quite plausible, yeah.
Okay. So we are running out of time. So let me do the last question should be a simple one. And
I'm afraid of that.
no. I didn't order them properly. I didn't, I was with you eating. So if sex allows adaptability to new environments, wouldn't an asexual being that has a super advantageous characteristic more likely to lose it with sex?
Great question. No, what I say is that because sex allows you to shuffle your DNA easily. I mean, the population, not the individual. I mean, the population has some some genetic material in different frequencies among the population. And what happens is that sex allows it to shuffle and have different frequencies very quickly, much quicker than the asexual population. Okay, so if the situation changes, I mean, the environmental change, it's easier to a sexual population to change the frequency of the DNA in the composition and perhaps adapt better to this place. What's the question? Because
I think the question is, suppose that you have something that gives you a super advantage in your environment, something super duper, very unlikely gonna some kind of mutation.
Okay.
If you are asexual, then you maintain that forever because you clone that property. If
Well, but
you
that's
have sex,
sexual-
you lose it. So it will be disadvantageous, I guess.
No. That's sex. They don't lose it. I mean,
It dilutes the population.
not really. You may mix or may not. I mean, depends on the the selection pressure. You see, I mean, there is selection, and there is selection made pressure to keep this genotype. You see, so not necessarily. I mean, you're talking about the situation you have a big advantage. Usually, natural selection itself will keep it anyway, no matter if it's sexual or asexual. What we're told here, I talked about this yesterday, and Mario talked about this today, I think, is that in stress situations, exactly the opposite. Sex become more interesting, and so organisms that are facultatively sexual, they start doing sex with, look, the situation is pretty bad, so let's do sex now. But they don't do that, but not in this way. But that's what happens. They become sexual because the environment is kind of hostile to them. So they shuffle their cards. That's what the metaphor I'm using.
Okay.
Exactly the opposite. If the cards are pretty good, if you're playing poker and you have a very good hand, you don't ask for cards. You just sit and bet.
Yeah, one thing which is important to, maybe we didn't stress that enough in our respective presentations, natural selection only works in the immediate, in the short term. It doesn't plan for the future. Then you cannot say that, well, we have sex because this is better in the long term because they will be able to have more variation and resist changes in the environment. No, that doesn't exist. Natural selection acts generation after generation after generation. It has to be immediate, the benefits. Otherwise, it will work the opposite way. So what happens to sex is that with the amount of pathogens that most living things have, we're always with the advantage of having variation generation after generation, because they're always attacking your immune system. We're talking about metazoans in general, but it also applies in one way or another to simpler forms. So yes, we have strong selective pressure for variation coming from pathogens, things that attack other organisms. Okay, now for the question that someone asked there specifically, I have a slightly different interpretation. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's what I think what it is. When you shuffle genes, usually in the process of meiosis, where we have the crossover, so you have parts of the chromosome going back there, back and forth, and between the two branches, and then you have more variation because you exchange parts of the chromosomes in your zygotes, and then you have recombination. Recombination is the best word. The thing is, sometimes you have advantageous genes that only make sense functionally if they're associated with another gene that is very different. for example, you can have a gene or a set of genes very good for your immune system, being very powerful in basically fighting everything efficiently. But if this set of genes is not modulated, it will begin to attack your own cells. The immune system is extremely complicated. It easily mistakes your own cells as the enemy. So you need a set of modulating genes that have to go together with that. So if in the crossover, the two blocks are separated, you end up maladaptive because your immune system is going to kill yourself. So they have to go together. What happens in this case? These two genes tend to come closer and closer in the chromosome as evolution goes by until they're adjacent. So the probability that crossover is going to separate them is very small. That's what we call the genes linkage, which is called. So they tend to go together physically in the chromosome to decrease the chances that the crossover breaking points will separate them. And in that situation, they always go together. And so what is selected is the position of the genes in the chromosome. They have to go together. So I don't know, maybe the question was along those lines. If you have something that is very, very good, it will be selected for the two parts of it to go together and never separate.
All right. So are there any final questions for any speaker?
There's cake.
Let's thank all our speakers for coming here. Thank you very much.